Good morning. Good morning. So good to be with you. It's this funny thing about Zoom. It's like, you're muted, Joan. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Buffalo. It is so good to see you on this Thanksgiving morning with the snow coming down and feeling cozy at home and all of those great things and feeling cozy with each other. When I looked at the screen last, there were 93 of us. That would be viewing screens. So that's like 125 of us gathered, huddled around the warmth of our worship space, connected through the ether in spirit. So good to have you with us. My name is Joan Montagnes, and I get to be your minister. Wow, what an honor and what a privilege to be your minister. So good to have you here. This, I want to let you know, this is a webinar, Zoom webinar worship service, which means we can't hear or see you. You can't see or hear each other. You can hear and see our worship associate, Julie Taylor. You're going to be able to see our religious education director, Sarah Martin, and our count 'em, five special guest stars. And of course, you can see me. You can also chat with each other as you are doing at a fabulous rate every Sunday right through the service. You add a lot to our worship time just uh, by doing that and showing that you're together and loving each other up. I want to thank, as I do every week, because I am so grateful, Josh Disick, John Petroselli, Justin DeClean, who was our tech today, Karen Streech, Bobby Withrow, Paul Zanoli, and all of our music staff who create our worship experiences. Oh my gosh, are they fabulous or what? Some announcements. If you haven't made your stewardship pledge for the 2021 church year yet, we would gratefully accept it, like sooner rather than later. It would be a wonderful thing to wrap this campaign up. So far, we have collected $275,000 toward our goal of 400,000, and that came from 115 generous donations. Sorry, yeah, 115 generous donations. If you're interested in statistics. It is easy to pledge. Very easy to donate to this congregation. Just make a stewardship pledge to and send the email to stewardship at buffalouu.org. Stewardship at buffalouu.org, or pledge me, sorry, send it to me and I'll send the pledge along. So pledge early, pledge often, help us keep this shining beacon of hope not only lit in the window for people on the journey, but also growing and changing as we learn deeper and deeper about ourselves. Other events coming up, sad to say. The Transgender Day of Remembrance service was canceled this year for the safety's sake during the pandemic. However, there is a memorial on our church lawn for the 34 transgender and non-binary people who were murdered during 2020 and in the United States. And there is one flag there for all of the unknown who we know are out there who were murdered. These are hate crimes. They deserve their names to be remembered. And you can pay a visit to them and pay your respects. One time you can do that as well. They'll be up all week, but a time you could do that is this afternoon between 2 and 4. Again, thanks to COVID, and yes, COVID is getting really old. Thanks to COVID, we've had to close down our Sunday services. And that means we're not doing our usual Thanksgiving thing. Usually on Thanksgiving, we have a nice bread communion, and you'll see a slide of that during one of our musical pieces. But we can't do that this year. So instead, we're having a cranberry sauce communion. Mary Coleman, Martha Malkowitz, and Charlene Montgomery have lovingly handmade, under sterilish conditions, made you cranberry sauce for your Thanksgiving tables. Come to the garden entrance between 2 and 4 today. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be offering you these lovely jars of cranberry sauce in communion with your community, with your faith community. And at this time, you'll also have an opportunity to share your gratitude and blessing by donating goods and or funds to Evergreen Health Services Food Pantry. A wish list for the food pantry items can be found in the e-blast. You can find those items also, I hope, in the chat. Yes. Oh, I love this, Bobby. Also, Zoom fellowship time. This is a Zoom webinar. As I said, we can't see or hear you. You can't hear or see each other, but we want fellowship. We're craving fellowship. And so we close this service down at about 11:30 every Sunday. And at 11:35, we open up a Zoom meeting, which is our fellowship time when you can see and hear each other. And we have a whole lot of fun together. That'll happen 11:35. The address to that is in the chat, in the e-blast, in the newsletter, and on the last slide of this worship service. So welcome, everybody. Let's give thanks. It is time to worship.
The call to worship today is called Giving Thanks and Exploring Suffering by Mike Johnson. It is always good to give thanks. All that we have is a gift from life, our food, our relationships, our shelter from the cold. And when we give thanks, it is always good to be mindful of all people and notice those who are suffering and do what we can to ease suffering and change its causes. Today, we give thanks and we explore suffering. We must always do both together so that our hearts are strong for the journey. Come, let us worship.
When Unitarian Universalists gather in worship, we mark a time as sacred instead of mundane, away from the everyday. This began at a time when Unitarian Universalists were acknowledging that there were people who were suffering who needed to be supported in finding new homes. Join me in our chalice lighting affirmation. We gather in loving community, inspiring one another to transform ourselves to create a more just and compassionate world. And let's join in singing. We give thanks.
Oh, we give thanks for this precious day, for all gathered here and those far away, for this time we share with love and care. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day, for all gathered here and those far away, for this void we share with love and care. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day.
Good morning. This year, like other years, we are going to be participating in the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee's Guest at Your Table program. The UUSC's mission is to advance human rights and social justice around the world, partnering with those who confront unjust power structures and mobilizing to challenge oppressive policies. Their work is grounded in the belief that all people have inherent power and dignity. During today's story, I will be sharing links in the chat to help you find out more about the work of the UUSC and this year's guests. If you're missing the cardboard donation boxes, the UUSC website even has a printable paper box so you can make one yourself. This year, there are so many ways we can give to the UUSC and to Guest at Your Table. You can use PayPal through the church website, through the donation button, and just be sure to write Guest at Your Table in the comments so Donna Sense, our wonderful bookkeeper, knows how to sort the money. Or you can collect your loose change just like in other years. And during the first week in December, the RE team and the Justice team are going to be collecting mitten tree items and items for Family Promise families. And you can bring your change to those collection dates. Keep an eye on your e-blast and the church website for days and times for those. And just to add a little aside from the Justice team, if you are a knitter or if you sew, they are going to be looking for 11 stockings. So those will also be collected at that time. And without any further ado, I am happy to introduce this year's story.
Hi, friends. In today's story, I want to introduce you to four people who live in very different parts of the world, but who are all working for fairness, respect, and justice. Even though we don't have a chance to meet them in person, I want you to imagine they are coming over for dinner with you and your family. Think of them as a dinner guest, telling you an interesting story over a big plate of your favorite food. All over the country, other kids like you are imagining the same dinner party and learning about the same people as part of a program called Guest at Your Table. The program is a chance to learn about four courageous people making a difference in their communities. This year, the four people we are going to meet are Adela, Mark, Chief Sherelle, and Suja. First, I want to introduce you to Adela, who lives in Guatemala. Over the past several years, the area Adela lives in has had a lot of people migrate or leave to go to another country. Many people are having to leave because there aren't enough jobs or enough food. Unfortunately, not having enough food to survive is not considered a good enough reason for someone to be welcomed into the United States, and many people are turned away and forced to return to Guatemala. Adela works to support people in the country so that the conditions are better and more fair. She also supports people who've been forced to return after migrating, who face the difficulty of returning to their homes after being away for many months or even years. Adela especially helps kids and teenagers who are returning to Guatemala. Next, I want to tell you about Mark, a scientist in the Marshall Islands. The Marshall Islands are a small chain of islands in the Pacific Ocean that are experiencing environmental damages, making it more and more difficult to live there. Because of climate change or human-made damages to the environment, the sea is at a higher level than it used to be, and flooding is becoming worse and worse. In his work, Mark teams up with members of his community in the Marshall Islands to collect information about the flooding and safe drinking water. This information is used to help build protections so that people do not have to leave their homes, and also help community members determine when flooding might become bad enough that they do have to move to a higher location or to a different country entirely. Some of these choices are hard to make, but it helps when people have all the information they need to be able to make the best decision they can for themselves. The third person I want to share with you about is Chief Sherelle, the leader of an Indian tribe in southern Louisiana, which can trace its ancestors back to the very first people we know of that lived in the area. Like Mark, Chief Sherelle is facing damages to her home from climate change and other human-caused activity. Being along the Louisiana coast, Chief Sherelle's community is losing land to the water, and the increase in salt water is also damaging trees and the land they use for hunting and farming. In the face of these challenges, Chief Sherelle is fighting for her people and lands. She works together with others to tell people what is happening to her community and advocate for support so they can build the protections they need to protect the land. Lastly, I want to introduce you to Suja, who's from Burma, which is also known as Myanmar. This is a country in Southeast Asia that borders China, Thailand, and India. Burma has a huge diversity of ethnic groups, people who practice similar traditions to each other. But the groups that have smaller populations face a lot of discrimination, which is limitations on their freedom and even danger. For example, Suja practices a different religion than the majority of people in the country, and because of this, he was prevented from completing school in Burma. When he protested and asked for a chance to continue with school, he was arrested and held in jail for more than a week. He was only a teenager when this happened. After he was let out of jail, he was afraid for his life and left the country. It was difficult to find services and build a new life elsewhere, but when he eventually did, he worked with others to create an organization supporting other refugees going through similar struggles. Together, they're creating a community that helps each other, even though they're far away from home. I hope these stories were a chance to learn about the challenges this year's 4 guests are facing and how they're fighting back for what is fair and what is right. Through Guest at Your Table, your congregation and other congregations around the country are helping to provide these guests with the resources to do their work. Together, we can make a better and fairer world. Thank you.
Every week, we take a good portion of our Sunday morning offering and give it away to a social justice cause outside our church walls. This month, we are supporting the good work of Evergreen Health Services. Evergreen Health fosters healthy communities by providing medical, supportive, and behavioral services to individuals and families in Western New York, especially those who are living with chronic illnesses or who are underserved by the healthcare system. They welcome everybody, celebrate diversity, collaborate with patients, use a harm reduction model, celebrate all successes, and respect everyone's life experience without judgment. You can use PayPal by going to our website, buffalouu.org, and clicking on the blue donate button. Or you can send a check by mail to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Buffalo at 695 Elmwood Avenue, Buffalo, New York, 14222. You can also arrange a regular automatic deposit from your bank. If yours is a gift to our Share the Plate ministry, please write share on the memo line and it will be shared between Evergreen Health and the church operating budget. If yours is a welcome gift to our congregation, please write Pledge 2020 on the memo line. Either way, please write UUCB on the important line. We will do the bookkeeping. Our generosity can help heal the world. Today's reading is called Happy Holidays by Sherman Alexie. I am asked this question at least a dozen times every year. Do Indians celebrate Thanksgiving? That's like asking, do Jewish people celebrate Oktoberfest? The answer is yes. Indians celebrate Thanksgiving. I just emailed a Jewish friend to ask about her feelings on Oktoberfest. And she wrote, never thought about it. No way I'd buy a BMW though. The best thing about humans, our ability to forgive. The second best thing, grudges. about 70% white meat and 30% dark with canned cranberry sauce. And no, I don't care how good your homemade cranberry sauce is.
Let's join our hearts and minds in a quiet moment of prayer, reflection, and meditation. This, my beloveds, is the meaning of thankfulness. When you share with me what is most important to you, that is where listening begins. When I show you that I hear you, when I say your life matters, that is where compassion begins. When I open the door to greet you, that is where hospitality begins. When I venture out to bring you to shelter, that is where love begins. When I risk my comfort to ease your suffering, when I act against hatred, violence, and injustice, that is where courage begins. When we experience the full presence of each other, because of our shared humanity, because of our differences, that is where holy gratitude begins. Today, we especially hold in our hearts Marilyn Burke, Andrea Burke Harris's mother, who is experiencing a difficult and major life transition with her family as she enters permanent full-time home care this week. And our hearts are with Tom Petroselli, who is recovering so well from his surgery. He's going to be running around with the youth group. Well, I think on Zoom today. So good healing continuing for you. And now let us open our worship space to the names of all our loved ones, suffering in sorrow and celebrating in joy. Each name a breath, each breath a prayer. The breath of nature is upon us. The spirit of life is within us. The community of love is among us. So be it. Blessed be. And let the church say, Amen. Once upon a time, there was a good and faithful people who were persecuted in their own land for their pure and reformed belief. So, to escape their oppression, these pilgrims sailed away on a ship called the Mayflower. After a long and perilous journey across thousands of miles of ocean, they landed at Plymouth Rock and built the first village on these shores. Here they hoped to live and prosper in religious freedom. But when they got to their new home, they were out of food, and it was very cold. Although the Lord miraculously provided a few cobs of corn found in the wilderness, many perished of starvation and disease. It was a sad time. But Providence was full of God's goodness. A Native American named Squanto appeared and welcomed the pilgrims to their new home. Squanto, again miraculously, spoke perfect English, and he helped the pilgrims get through the cold, taught them how to hunt, how to fish, and in the spring showed them how to grow crops. He even taught them how to defend themselves against hostile Indians. At harvest time, the pilgrims rejoiced in God's mercy and planned a celebration. They invited all their Native American friends. They ate the food they had grown and hunted themselves: turkey, sweet potatoes, dressing, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie. And that was the first Thanksgiving ever. Wait a minute. That's not right. In fact, almost everything about that story is a load of hogwash. The good and faithful people were not actually all that good, and they didn't call themselves pilgrims. They called themselves separatists. And they most certainly didn't build the first villages on these shores or celebrate the first Thanksgiving ever. Squanto wasn't named Squanto at all. His name was Squantum, and he was a member of the Patuxet tribe, and his mastery of the English language was no miracle. Long before the separatists arrived, Squantum was kidnapped by an English explorer who carried him off to Spain, where he was sold into slavery. He eventually made his way to England, served in the home of a shipbuilder, was smuggled off to Newfoundland, and then somehow he made his way south to his home village, only to discover his entire tribe had been wiped out by an epidemic infection, no doubt brought over by the Europeans. The separatists found corn in the wilderness. Oh, that much is true. But what they found was a few straggling remains from the ruins of the Patuxet civilization. And the only reason Sequantum helped the separatists survive was because the separatists agreed to aid the local Wampanoag tribe in keeping the Nagaranset tribe at bay. Hmm. Unfortunately, unforeseen, massive, and deadly wave of English settlers. So the pilgrims, who were actually not pilgrims at all, weren't the first arrival. Let's just start there. And God's providence, if present at all, for these completely unprepared, fairly clueless colonizers, came in the form of a remarkably forgiving, formerly enslaved indigenous diplomat whose community and culture had been forever destroyed. How's that for a reframe? It's old news, right? The Pilgrims weren't the first settlers in this land, and they certainly didn't celebrate the first Thanksgiving ever. Oh, and by the way, there was no sweet potato casserole, dressing, cranberry sauce, or pumpkin pie at the meal. How did they survive? No. The first celebration of Thanksgiving in North America occurred during Martin Frobisher's 1579 voyage from England as he searched for the Northwest Passage and a fine spot to place the first village in this new land. Frobisher led 15 ships across the ocean. He lost one in the ice along with a bunch of building supplies. And when the colonizers landed, they once again thanked God for his great goodness. And that was the first Thanksgiving ever. Every Canadian knows that. But wait a minute, that's not right either. Frobisher wasn't the first to settle this land. Wasn't it Cortez who came to these shores, dashing young Spaniard who set out on adventure across the seas to seek his fortune? After a short stop in Cuba in 1519, so we're going back in time here, in 1519, he became captain of an expedition to the mainland. But after a big fight with the governor of Cuba, he was recalled from that uh, that expedition to the mainland. Cortez, undeterred by authority, like the best of us, ignored the governor's order and sailed on. Arriving on the continent, Cortez conquered and divided the indigenous people and used a native woman, Donna Marina, as an interpreter and mother of his first son. Read that as you will. When the governor of Cuba sent emissaries to arrest Cortez for disobedience, remember he didn't sail back, Cortez, with the aid of the indigenous people, slaughtered off the emissaries and then had the temerity to ask the King of Spain to be acknowledged for his successes as a conquistador instead of being punished for subordination. And after Cortez destroyed the Aztec Empire, he was indeed awarded the noble title of Marquis. Ain't that grand? But wait a minute, that's not quite right either. Cortez wasn't the first. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Columbus discovered America. We all know that. This is how this is how Thomas King, in his book, The Inconvenient, I'm just going to move this for a second so I don't set myself on fire. Okay. The Inconvenient Indian, fabulous book, by the way. This is how he tells the story of Columbus landing. He writes, listen up, boys and girls. 3 little ships, none of them in showroom condition, bobbing their way across the Atlantic. The good captain keeping 2 journals so his crew wouldn't know just how far they drifted from the unknown world. Sorry, from the known world. Yikes. I don't want to drift from the known world. The great man himself, that would be Columbus, the great man himself, wading ashore, wet and sweaty, flag in hand, a letter of introduction from the emperor, from the king and queen of Spain to the emperor of the Indies, tucked in his tunic. It was a Kodak moment. And let's not forget all the sunny weather, the shady beaches, the azure lagoons, and the friendly natives. Seriously. I mean, this really is a good book. He meant that in irony. But really, point one, Columbus didn't discover America. We also already know that. Explorers and fishing boats had been coming from Europe since the 10th century when the Vikings set up camp in Newfoundland. And some say the Asians came before that. It's easy for those of us of European descent to think, oh, that wasn't me. Those are terrible stories, but I didn't do any of that. Well, here's a fun fact for you, a fun fact that is indeed true. Those separatists who eventually became pilgrims, well, after they became pilgrims, they became what we know today as Congregationists and, wait for it, Unitarians. We're like the great, 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 great spiritual grandbabies of the pilgrims. So we're kind of part of the story. And today, we live on land originally inhabited by the Haudenosaunee, which means people who build long houses. A house that is a home, protects, welcomes, holds all the people in the alliance of 6 nations, commonly known as the Iroquois Confederacy. We live on Turtle Island. We live on stolen land. When you look at it, the whole lively experiment of America is founded on First Nation hospitality. Europeans in search of a new home were to greater or lesser extent welcomed by the original inhabitants of these lands. But you know, as the old adage says, guests are like fish. After a while, they begin to stink. In our case, we really began to stink. This land, we colonizers, those of us of European descent, we decided this would be our land, our home. So when we found that our welcome had worn out, we simply killed off our hosts. The United States of America was built on slavery, and it was also built on genocide. Between 1492 and 1600, 90% of the indigenous populations in the Americas died. This means about 55 million people perished because of violence and never before seen pathogens like smallpox, measles, and influenza. Do Indians celebrate Thanksgiving? Do Jews celebrate the Holocaust? It's always good to give thanks. All that we have is a gift from life. Our food, our relationships, our shelter from the cold. When we give thanks, when we count our blessings, it is good to be mindful of all people and notice those amongst all people who are suffering. It is good to discover the causes of suffering and change those causes. It is good to understand the history of this land and our part in it. To prepare for the future, we must make peace with our past as colonizers and oppressors. Today, we give thanks and we explore suffering. We must always do both together so that our hearts are strong for the journey. This year, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee is asking us to be people of healing by understanding the meaning of hospitality and home. There may be fewer at your Thanksgiving table this year because of the pandemic. So let's invite Adela, Mark, Chief Sherelle, and Suja as guest tables. This year, let's open our hearts with hospitality, compassion, courage, and love. Let's invite in fairness, respect, and justice. Let's invite in the indigenous peoples, refugees from around the world to our tables. The Biloxi, Chitmacha, Choctaw tribe to our tables, and the Rohingya to our tables. Let's support all these people, strong communities in the face of racism, oil pipeline change, religious persecution, and poverty. This year, there is no reason for your welcome table to seem empty. I'll tell you what, there never was a first Thanksgiving ever. And this is not a new land. Thanksgiving is a way of life for the First Nations of this ancient, ancient place. Native American spirituality, both traditionally and today, emphasizes gratitude for creation, care for the environment, and recognition of the human need for communion with nature and with our neighbors. May we live in unceasing gratitude, make peace with our past, learn from our neighbors, and together heal the world. Let's sing. Let's sing. We're going to sit at the welcome table this day and every day.
We're gonna sit at the welcome table. We're gonna sit at the welcome table one of these days. Hallelujah. We're gonna sit at the welcome table. Gonna sit at the welcome table one of these days. All kinds of people around that table. All kinds of people around that table. One of these days, hallelujah. All kinds of people around that table. Gonna sit at the welcome table one of these days. No fancy style at the welcome table. welcome table one of these days.
Please join me in extinguishing the chalice by saying with me the words on your screen. As we extinguish the flame of this chalice, may we carry its light with us into the world in the power of peace, faith, justice, and love.
May your world be a table that's not complete until all are welcome. May our table be a space of beauty where together we create a series of miracles and where all that we share, including cranberry sauce, is sacred. Remember, you are blessed. Remember, you are a blessing. And above all else, remember, you are not alone. You are never alone. So be it. Blessed be. And let the church say, Amen.